Dr. Andy Galpin, what would you say your golden rules for building muscle, losing fat, ideally at the same time are? And no particular order, but you're a wealth of information. There's a lot of newer evidence coming out. You've been involved in some really cool papers as well. So I'm curious, where would you start with that? What's like sort of the first golden rule for Dr. Andy Galpin?
Well, first we have to answer, is it possible? So what I mean by that is it actually even possible to add muscle and lose fat at the same time? There is incredibly clear evidence, in my opinion, that can happen. Now, there's some context that needs to be said here.
After this video, I put a link down below for Create, which are creatine gummies. So if you eat meat, one of the benefits of meat is going to be creatine. But creatine is also the most studied, or second most studied next to caffeine, ergogenic aid that is out there. So Create has creatine gummies with actually a new improved formula that has 1.5 grams of creatine per gummy. So you can low dose your creatine throughout the course of the day, so you potentially have less water retention with it. They also reduce their sugar in their gummies by 40%. So it's a low sugar gummy that has just the right ratio of carbohydrates to creatine to aid in the absorption and proper utilization of creatine. So the cool thing is with Create is they're trying to change the stigma behind creatine. Because I had like Dr. Darren Kandow on my channel, for example. He's one of the lead creatine researchers in the world. Found that like women, pregnant people, all kinds of people, even people in their teens, benefit from creatine, not just for muscle, but for potential inflammatory issues, all kinds of things. So I highly, highly recommend that you take even a low amount of creatine. Even as little as 1 to 3 grams, you can notice a noticeable effect on your energy, on your recovery, and definitely on your strength. So the gummies make it nice because you can low dose throughout the day. So that link down below saves you 15% off anything you want from Create. So you can get 15% off of those creatine gummies. Got to use that special link down below underneath this video.
Gaining muscle and losing fat at the exact same time generally only happens with people that are pretty untrained or low levels of training. So they haven't been training for many, many years or haven't done it consistently, taken a lot of breaks. So they've got a pretty low or small molecular background, and they're also not incredibly lean. And so if you are pretty overweight, maybe you've packed on a handful of extra pounds, and you haven't trained a long time, then it is possible, and we see that. As you get leaner and as you get more training experience, that becomes really, really challenging and what we'll effectively call impossible. Not to say you can't literally do any, but it's very, very marginal at that point. So if you're in that first category, you got a shot. If you're in the second category, you probably need to take more of a classic bodybuilder approach, which is to say spend time adding muscle mass first, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 6 months, depending on how much muscle you want to add. And then coming back from there, knowing that during that time where you've added muscle mass, you've brought on some fat as well. Then you transition and try to keep as much of that muscle as you can, though you won't keep it all. In fact, we know that for people that are really, really lean and they go into energy deficit, you're going to lose something like 2 to 3 times more protein than someone who's not as lean or as big. So you're going to lose a lot more, but you're going to lose mostly fat. And that is going to be at the end the way that you've sort of net added more muscle and lost more fat. So at the onset, we've got different recommendations for different sets of people based on where they're at on those spectrums.
Gotcha. So with that, can someone still continue to build muscle in a deficit in general if their protein needs are met?
If they are untrained and they are overweight, especially those combinations.
Gotcha. So if someone, even like myself, if I were to say, okay, I'm lean, I'm going to put myself in a little bit of a deficit, maybe not extreme, maybe 100, 200 calorie deficit, but I'm increasing my protein by, I don't know, let's say another 20%. I mean, where do you sort of draw the line? Like at what point can someone say, or at least maintain, and where is that line between building muscle and maintaining in a deficit?
Yeah, so I mean, we tested you a little bit earlier, 187 pounds today, 7.3% body fat. I think it'd be very challenging for you to be in a true deficit and to add any muscle mass. Maybe a pounder, something like that, but it would not be much. And if it did, I would probably say then we weren't really in a deficit. I would say that 200 calories is outside of our range of accuracy. That would be really, really challenging. So I think it would be really hard for someone like you.
And how can we really define deficit? I've always kind of gotten frustrated with this because like the clock doesn't reset at midnight, right? It's like, so personally, and you can tell me if this is an interesting way of looking at it or not, as someone that does a lot of time restricted feeding, I've always tried to, if I am going to track, I almost look at it over the course of a week.
Yep.
Because I'm going to have a day where I'm at 1,500 and I'm going to have a day where I'm at 4,000. And I almost seem to maintain better that way, because net at the end of the week, I'm kind of putting myself in these like mini bulk and cuts throughout the week.
Yeah. Well, actually, so one of the most highly cited papers I've ever published was in 2019. I was a co-author with Dr. Lane Norton, Dr. Eric Helms on this one, and Jackson Pales was the first author, called Intermittent Dieting. And that was really, at the time, that's 2019, so data have changed, but I'll at least walk you up to speed with that paper. Really what we're looking at there is diet refeeds or diet breaks. So this is a basic idea that if you stay in a caloric restriction too long, or for any amount of time, you have what's called adaptive thermogenesis, which is to say your body starts to reduce its own internal caloric expenditure to match your reduced intake, right? And so what we're seeing happen is your resting metabolic rate or energy expenditure will come down. Specifically, it's like what's called your NEAT, so your non-exercising thermogenesis. So this is the calories you burn throughout the day from twitching and kind of tapping your toes and like non-exercise things. If you keep your caloric expenditure from exercise the same, say you're measuring with the heart rate monitor or something like that, that's fine. And then your thermal effect of food is the fourth kind of main category. This is the energy your body takes to break down food. Okay, well, you're not going to really change that one, and let's just say you were diligent about keeping your exercise to the exact same amount of calories. We see those other numbers start to come down. And so while you've reduced your calorie intake by 20%, then eventually your body starts to bring down your caloric expenditure by 20%. And it continues to move this game, so you keep pulling calories down, you keep reducing energy expenditure. This is one of the reasons why people say things like, oh, calories don't matter because I cut my calories way down and I didn't lose a pound. Like, well, it still matter. Calories in, calories out still matter. Maybe weighing and measuring your calories is not always the best approach for everyone, but that doesn't mean that the rule that calories in, calories out has somehow been changed or lost or refuted. So that's clearly happening. So we're paying attention to that at all times. Now, in that study, what we wanted to look, or in that review, what Jackson wanted to look at was, are we actually seeing any benefit of a diet break, a refeed? Most common things are this. Say I'm in a caloric deficit of, say, 25 to 50%, meaning if my maintenance is 2,000 calories, 2,000 calories keeps me 185 pounds, whatever, right? Then I reduce from 2,000 to 1,500, a 25% drop, something like that. Okay, so below maintenance would be the number. And you did that consistently, and you did, say, 3 weeks at that deficit, and then you did a fourth week is a refeed where you go back up to maintenance. It's not an all-you-can-eat Sunday. It's not a cheat meal or cheat day or week or anything like that. It is just back to maintenance, okay? And the idea, the rationale there is we know that this adaptive thermogenesis happens. Why it happens exactly? Well, we don't know per se. There's been a lot of research on ghrelin and leptin, which are kind of the two molecules in your body that regulate, feeling full or feeling hungry. Lots of work. We talked earlier in another video about insulin can get too low, actually, which is, a lot of people say things like insulin is anabolic because it drives glucose into the cell, which you need carbohydrate to power muscle protein synthesis or muscle growth. Probably best to think of insulin as more like anti-catabolic than it is pro-anabolic because it reduces muscle breakdown. That's one of the benefits it has, right? So that can get too low. Testosterone is like very clearly gonna go down. IGF-1 has some mixed data, may or may not go down as well. Another kind of pro-anabolic signal. So lots of things change in your body that change not only the muscle growth and breakdown side of the equation, but change your appetite. We know cortisol can be altered as well, and this can change what's happening. So it becomes hard to be in that deficit because you start feeling hungrier more often. Appetite changes. And then you see the physiological change of muscle growth and breakdown. We start seeing altered metabolic properties. We start seeing a bias away from fat oxidation, like different things like that. So in that paper up to date, it didn't seem to be a clear, strong answer that diet breaks or refeeds are massively better. But on aggregate, it was sort of like, well, did you know that you could actually increase your calories for an entire week of the month and you'll be at the same spot? And so then Jackson actually did I think it was his dissertation called the ICAP study or ICAP study or something like that, ICAP study. And they looked at, I think, 12 straight weeks of continuous caloric restriction at the same No, I don't remember if it was 25% reduction or 50% reduction, 35%, something like that, relative to the 3-to-1. So 3, at the end, basically the same exact results. And they looked at leptin, ghrelin, insulin, muscle, body composition, like looked at a number of different factors. And so one could say the diet refeeds and breaks didn't do anything, but one could also say, but you also ate way more calories one whole week of the month for 3 months and your muscle, your fat loss was the same.
Yeah.
And everything else. In addition, the diet breaks did seem to have a small advantage with things like satiety and hunger, stuff like that. And so the answer is like, well, clearly both work. Some people don't like adding calories back. They can't control themselves. They run into problems that way. I know I work with an athlete, professional athlete, who's like that. I'm like, hey, we can add some calories back. He's like, no. Like, I don't. Like, it just freaks him out too much. He's like, I'd rather just stay in the system. So he likes the regimen, doesn't want variation. Other athletes I've dealt with are the opposite. They're just like, oh my gosh, we have to do something different here. Like, I can't stand eating the same thing every day. Great. So I think you have options.
Yeah.
Is the one. Typically, I would say the diet refeeds is probably a really good idea. Some people do 2 weeks. 2 weeks, so 2 weeks deficit, 2 week maintenance. You did it actually on the day. So some people will do that, like 6 days a week deficit, 1 day a week refeed. I don't think that we have any information to suggest one of these methods is massively superior to any of the other ones. So I think you have plenty of options, and you could probably just like make it up a little bit. So I think when it comes to like what is a deficit, what is not a deficit, it's a little bit hard to just go day by day for the points you're making, right? It's clearly like a deficit. In this case, you counted it by kind of like the week.
Yeah.
I think these data show you can actually count it by the month.
Yeah.
Or almost by the quarter.
Yeah.
In this case, like after 12 weeks or 3 months, same spot. I mean, does it really matter that much? Your physiology is going to move quite a bit with what you're doing, so it's not probably that precise.
Yeah, it probably depends on like how lean you are already too. Like if I were to look at it by the quarter, I would have to be okay with some fluctuations, right?
Yeah.
If I'm looking at it a week, it's a small enough scale for me to fine tune, right?
Yes.
But it's not so obsessive. It's like I have a jar of peanut M&Ms right there. I eat one. Am I in a deficit anymore? I'm not in a deficit. Okay, now I'm in a deficit 5 seconds later, right? So it's like, how do you define that? You'd be a good person to have describe energy flux and G flux as well, because I've talked about this in terms of, hey, like maybe the best strategy for a lot of people, I say best with quotes realistically, eat more and move more, right?
Yeah.
Just because there's an energy cost associated. Like someone eating 5,000 calories and moving 5,000 calories isn't the same net zero as someone eating 2,000, moving 2,000, or and burning 2,000. You, given this is largely more your wheelhouse, I mean, can you explain that and how that works, sort of the mobilization cost, the energy flux, et cetera?
Yeah, so what you want to think about is, and this has become particularly relevant, so I work with and have for a long time athletes who compete in weight class sports. This is professional boxers, many UFC fighters, wrestlers, Olympic weightlifters, power lifters. I've worked with Olympians and world champions in all of those sports. In those particular cases, we have to hit a certain number on a certain scale on a certain day. It's not about body composition or appearances. It is about you have to get this number one way or the other. A big key to that is you can't, what we call, come limping in. Like you can't get on close to that scale in a position where you're eating 800 calories a day because you're going to be destroyed. You have to come in at the highest rate possible. So what we want to do is people in that 5,000, right? So if you are at a net balance and we start off your camp, or we're 12 weeks out from the Olympics or wherever we're going to be, and you're burning 3,000 calories a day, but we're eating 3,000 calories a day and you're at maintenance, great. Then when I take 500 calories off your diet, you're still at 2,500 calories. You're still going to lose weight at a pretty good clip there, but you're not going to feel that big a deal. If your training partner is the other person you described, and they're at 15 and 15, and I pull 500 from them, now I've taken a third of their calories, and that is going to hurt bad, right? You're going to feel these things. This is when we're going to see all those physiological responses that are negative, that are associated with overtraining or overreaching, poor performance dips, injury risks, mood, psychological disturbances, digestive issues, like all kinds of things start to happen when we have nowhere to pull. In addition, we don't have any more calories to pull for if we get aggressive. And we got to get the weight off faster. We don't have anywhere else to go. And so what you want to be in a position is to rev that engine up really high and to get that up there. And I have worked with actually a very well-known professional fighter who was like that. And this is a heavyweight, like very well-established heavyweight who, like we would track all of his data, heart rate monitor on this poor guy. He would burn thousands of calories a day, and we would weigh and measure all of his food, and he's at 1,800 calories a day and not losing weight as a 300-pound guy. He's training multiple times a day, and we're just like, whoo, his metabolic rate was so compressed that it got nothing. The only calories he was basically burning, and I'm being a bit facetious here, were coming from his workouts. And so he had just dug himself into too low of that hole. We had to get him much, much, much higher, which meant we had to go through a period where he was going to gain some weight because we had to reverse that adaptive thermogenesis. We had to get that thing really, really high so that net turnover got large. And then when we reduced calories, it was much easier. So that's maybe the most practical way to think about that stuff.
Yeah, because when people ask me, okay, well, how do I sort of rebuild, get my metabolism back up? That's usually I say, hey, I'm maybe not the guy to ask on that, but what I would do and what I have done is I try to eat more, but when I do eat more, I also try to move more. So I'm not just like keeping my activity level the same and eating more. I'm saying, okay, I'm going to eat more, and I might not move as much. The proportion, the scale might be a little bit different, but it's going to be, if I burn an extra 3,000 or if I eat an extra 300, I might try to burn an extra 200, at least get myself climbing up there. What's your take on the constrained energy model and sort of like at a certain point, your body's always going to find a range? I mean, obviously there's some merit to it, but it's not super concrete. So.
I think that's a nice way to describe it. It clearly happens, right? We have seen this stuff. And like we've seen a lot of Herman Pontzer's work. Okay, looks okay, right? And this clearly happens. At the same time, I would say it how you said it. It's like obviously we haven't hit this thing nail on the head yet either. So it's very interesting. I would have to venture as we can do more and more work, not me, but other folks who do that research. We're going to flesh that out more. I think it was a really good idea. I think there's a lot there for the most part, but clearly it's not perfect. It's super interesting though.
No, it's very interesting. I mean, and it does at least affirm for me that like non-exercise activity thermogenesis is a very, very, very important real thing. I mean, that's the one thing that comes back to.
It's a governor. It's a physiological governor, right? Like you have that because we have, let's look at this. If the constraint theory worked perfectly, and what you're saying here is, again, your body will adjust its caloric expenditure to match your intake at all times, right? And this is one of the reasons why many, 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 many millions of people have tried to go on diets and it didn't work, right? This is also why when you see things like physical activity and exercise studies aren't always super effective for weight loss. Okay, great. Well, what's explaining that? Well, it has to be this mismatch of there, and there's this response to keep you fed there. I think that's true. I also think you have a ton of data showing it does work. Yeah. We have also shown millions of people lose millions and millions of pounds. So exercise clearly does work. Like, I don't know how anyone could ever really make any cogent thought to think like exercise doesn't help with fat loss. Like there's just no, it's childish to say that. Like clearly it does. Is it 100% you run 500 calories today, 7 days later you'll be down a pound? No. It's definitely not that simple either. But to say it has no bearing would be, like, again, childish is like the best word I can come up with right now to think that that's realistic. So both of those things, both of those realities can exist in the same paradigm that says, okay, great, it's not fully that either. And I think part of the constrained model also has been helpful for people who are like, man, stop just telling me to work harder. Yeah. Like, I am working hard and I'm not losing weight. And I am weighing and measuring and I'm not losing weight. Oh, they're just not weighing enough. Or they're not trying enough, or they're not measuring. Like, well, okay, no. Like, I don't think that's explaining all of it. I think it probably explains a lot, but there's clearly some cases when that's not happening as well. Your physiology is going against you. I will always harp on, like, this is why, if you have the ability to, you need to be looking at things besides just the scale and the calories. Your physiology will tell you this. Right? Your blood will tell you this. Your cardiovascular system will tell you this. Your sleep will tell you this. We will see what's happening physiologically. So when this stuff starts happening, we go, okay, yeah. Well, we see biologically why this is going on. And you'll see those signs way before you start to see changes in the scale or not.
Yeah, that's what I like about what you guys do. I mean, you guys do take soft plug for you guys, even though it's not supposed to be that way. I mean, you guys do take that approach, right, where it's a lot more of looking at these other changes that are happening underneath the hood that people probably don't really look at, because I think if you were to just go online and look how to lose weight, like you're going to be flooded with count your calories and calories in, calories out, and that's it. And that does matter, but it matters in what it's driving under the hood, not just based on the scale.
Yeah, it can for a lot of people. If look, I've had a lot of success with people who want a one solution answer. Right, all I want to do is lose weight. I don't care about this stuff. I don't care about anything else. And can I just go to mostly meat? Sure. Yeah. I've seen it work. No question. Can I go to intermittent fasting? Yes. No, nothing else. No other part of that conversation. That's the only rule. Don't eat in the morning. Great. Seen that work. Okay, so you can be these one-stop answers, and that will work. And what I would really like to emphasize is I don't like taking options away from people. So I don't want you to think you have to do all this fancy blood work like we do to get weight loss. Not at all. It can be super simple like that. It can be done in a healthy way that's hyper effective.
Yeah.
But also maybe it's not effective, so there are other options. So the best way I will always say this is I just want to give people more options so that they don't think you have to do things a certain way. I think this is in general, when we get into fat loss in particular in our field, where most of the chicanery happens, most of the charlatan happens, it's trying to convince people that it's got to be done this way, that there's this particular scapegoat, there's this molecule, or there's this body type, or there's this hormone that's causing all of your problems. My pushback is always against that narrative. That's just never going to be the case. Yeah. I want more options for people. So I want people to talk about they ate a raw broccoli only diet and felt great. Like, well, that's dope. Give someone that option. Yeah. I want people to talk about I did this or keto, like great. All of that goes. Just don't tell the whole world that everyone should do that, and that it solves all of your problems and your cancer went away, and you also had your fertility like, oh, okay, now we're getting into the realm of scientific integrity issues. But if all we're doing is saying, hey, this is an option. If that didn't work for you, here's an option. If that didn't work for you, here's an option. If that didn't work for you, here. Some of you want to go all the way and get everything done, know all about your physiology. Great. Companies like mine exist. Some people don't. Great, and you just want rough ideas and free, and you have okay, awesome. Like, we want resources for everyone to meet them wherever they're at, interest, financially, abilities, learning, all of it. That's the idea.
Yeah, no, give them the tools that they need and be able to see it and see what's under the hood and being able to, and then it's also, I mean, it's getting people excited about it, right? I mean, that's kind of what I try to do on my channel is, yes, I will, full disclaimer, sometimes talk about mechanistic bullshit. And I give a disclaimer with it. But my point isn't to say this isn't to like solve all the world's problems. It's to like, hey, look at this. It's pretty exciting. Maybe this is something you can take some interest in. And maybe it gives you that motivation to kind of look into this more. And that's how I look at it as a non-scientist, right? I'm allowed to like get excited about something, of course, and just be like, hey, this is interesting.
Your show, bro. You can do whatever you want.
Cool. Keto
the hell
it all.
Your audience.
Right. Yeah, right. So with that, though, I want to pivot over to the relationship between gut health and body composition a little bit. You've done some work in this field, and people very much so, especially on this channel, they take an interest in gut health specifically for whatever reason. Probably just because it's something that is catchy for people, but also it's something that's very near and dear to people. A lot of people, deal with gastrointestinal issues, but they also realize that a lot of it starts there. What would you say, on a scale of 1 to 10, in your opinion, the relationship with a healthy microbiome, healthy gut health, and the ability to lose fat and build muscle is? Based on what we know now.
3?
Okay.
4 maybe?
That's still, I actually think 4 is decent.
It matters. It's not 8.
Yeah.
It's not 9, right? I'm certainly not a world caliber gut health expert by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. We have published some papers in those areas. Greg Grosicki and Jimmy Bagley authored that one paper that you're referring to. We're just about 2 weeks away from finishing up a study here on female athletes and the gut microbiome across the menstrual cycle, and looking at that's relevance to sex hormones. And there's clear, the field is growing enormously in here. There's strong connections to your gut health and a lot of other things. There's also lots of nonsense out there that all these things can be true in those areas. So just speaking to what we know roughly scientifically, there's been a lot of cool trials, fecal transplant studies, helping people, well, actually even animal models lose weight. when things are non-controlled. So there's clearly something there, but we've now taken the large gap between that and saying that's an 8 or a 9 or a 10. Particularly if there's tremendous dysfunction in the gut, maybe it makes more of an impact. What does dysfunction mean? I don't know, like per se. Like that stuff gets really, really challenging. So there is some stuff going on there. What I would hope that people think is saying, okay, my first step in my weight loss process is a gut cleanse. That's probably most, I'm gonna go, I don't think so here. Perhaps though, if you've done a lot of things and you've worked really hard in this and you are on steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, at that point maybe it is worth it for you to go in and get somebody, a qualified physician or whatnot, to take a look at gut health and work there. And you may see some benefit there.
So what are some of the sort of chronic exercise adaptations you've seen with the gut? I mean, this paper in particular was looking at this, so I'm interested.
Yeah, so we focused on that one on acute exercise adaptations. So what people don't realize that is clearly there are chronic adaptations that happen. So if you change your dietary patterns, fiber intake, how often you eat, what type of foods you eat, all this stuff, we know this changes throughout the lifespan, of course. Right? But what we were interested in is people don't realize there's a lot of acute things that happen with like a single or up to even, I think we stopped it at 2 weeks. So exercise lasting 2 weeks or less to a single bout of exercise. A lot of things can happen. There is not a clear, I wish I could give you like, oh, this thing goes up with exercise.
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't happen because there's just too many markers. In fact, the reality of it is there's an unending list of things that are in the gut microbiome that can be measured. And really, scientifically, we're only measuring a handful of them at this point. So some interesting stuff can happen. There's one particular molecule, Acromycia, that is really relevant and prevalent to VO2 max and endurance performance. Looks like that tends to be a little bit higher in people that are more endurance trained. But with the acute exercise stuff, I think maybe the only real important take-home message we see there is it will change within a single bout of exercise. We've got to caveat that though with saying there's potential that that's just a little bit of noise as a result of the way that the tests are done. Clearly, you'll see some inflammatory markers jump through the roof. Like LPS is the most common one, right? So you'll see intestinal permeability change. Greg and Jimmy have actually done work on things like gut microbiome samples pre-post ultramarathons, triathlons, and stuff like that, where you're getting a tremendous amount of inflammation, a tremendous amount of blood flow movement, a lot of calories going in really, really quickly, and then you see gut microbiome is in disarray. Why does this stuff matter? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the part where it's like, hey, we just want to start with, there's been enough acute exercise studies to say lots of things happen in 1, 3, 4, 5, 6 bouts of exercise where you'll see a statistical change in F-to-B ratio and some other things like that, Acromycia I mentioned. What's the practical take home? I don't know. Like I have no idea any of those things yet. How long does it last? When does it come back to baseline? I don't know. Great idea. Great question. Don't know yet. So this was just kind of like first step into saying, let's just see what happens with one bout of exercise or acute. And now let's build on this, and we probably need many more years of research to figure out, is there a take-home message? Is there something you can do different about it? At this point, I'd say no.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as the endurance stuff goes, I mean, you've kind of seen that for quite a long time, right?
Yes.
That evidence has been there. I mean, it doesn't even take a test to realize that when you do endurance work that you're totally effed up gastrointestinally, right?
For
so
sure.
it's, but then I mean, the question I have is, does that seem to govern or regulate some of the overall systemic inflammation, the increases in IL-6 that comes, say, after endurance work? How long does it last, right? Like, is it one of those, or is that a very localized thing? Are you just having gut inflammation, or is this a cascade that actually, because I mean, I've noticed that a lot of endurance athletes, their IL-6 is elevated pretty significantly after longer runs, right?
Definitely.
And is it pretty localized, or what's happening there?
It's not localized, but what I don't know is cause and effect there. Yeah. So it's to say that if you pull any inflammatory marker after a triathlon, it's going to be up.
Forget it. Yeah.
It's clearly not just the gut, right? It is there as well. Is it coming from the gut and then spreading out? Yeah, that's where LPS and stuff start to kick in. Is it also coming from other tissue and getting into the gut? Probably, surely. Yeah. Like, is there other local inflammation that's happening that's just then being spread throughout the system? All the above would be the example there. IL-6 is fine, it's interesting, but I would caution people away from measuring that alone as an inflammatory marker.
IL-10 as well, or?
Well, even if you just start grabbing the entire cytokine list, you're going to see numbers, like very often if you do IL-6, you're going to see it come up as non-registerable. Anyways, it's going to come down super low, like basically nothing. And so what you're going to see is you can look at things like creatine kinase, and you're going to have a predicted. I actually have an athlete who we took creatine kinase from every single day for probably 4.5 years, like every day. Eventually it's just like, well, I know what's happening here. Like, I don't really need to see this anymore. I know that there are some of our NFL athletes are taking biomarkers 3 or 4 times a week. We're getting about 12 to 15 markers from blood that we can do multiple times throughout the week. And IL-6 is one of them, but you would not want to stop there because you will get a lot of false flags from that one. You'll need to pull many of them in addition to markers non-interleukin based, non-cytokine based ones to get a real sense of that. This is when if you really want to get a sense for inflammation, you have to realize that there is no such thing as inflammation. There's no, there is a clinical diagnosis for diabetes, a clinical number to hit to be pre-diabetic, right? There is no clinical number to say you're inflamed. It is just whoever's reading that gets to say you're inflamed. I don't know what that number is. So you want to be careful against that one. And then there's so many other methods that you have of dealing with it. And IL-6 being very acute and transient, you may want to make sure if you really do think you're suffering from that you have something that balances that short to moderate, so something that is in the ballpark of a 24-hour or 7-day or even up to like a 14+ day marker of inflammation. Those would be better to go after.
So if we bring this full circle back to someone that's maybe trying to optimize for fat loss at a specific point in time, is there a certain level of exercise that you find is going to be a tolerable upper level before fat loss starts to become impeded? Like, does it actually become a barrier to more, I don't want to say fat loss per se, but let's say, I know that most recreational people that are working out are probably not even near the realm of overtraining.
No.
So if you had to look at it, you say where is a sweet spot that's going to still kind of optimize for that without pushing it too far, right? You've got some people out there that'll say, okay, well, if cortisol is elevated too high, then that's going to be, an encumbrance to building muscle. I think that's negligible, right? It's going to be one of those things where, is there a point where, okay, you are causing so much damage? And I'm sure, yes, there is a point, but are most people hitting that point when, yes, you're doing so much damage that this is an encumbrance to you having any body composition change or losing fat, or it's...
Yeah. So you brought it up really quickly, but true overtraining is incredibly rare.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a handful of review articles you can go look at, but strength training specifically induced overtraining has only really been shown one time.
Yeah.
And that was actually a paper from a lab I worked in as a master's student, Andy Fry, where they did 1 rep max back squat, and they did 10 of those per day, every day, for like 14 days. And that actually took the participants somewhere between 2 to 8 weeks to actually get back to baseline. So overtraining is not really a thing. It can happen more commonly, I should say, in endurance individuals. So it's more prevalent there, but still honestly quite rare.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean you're not doing too much exercise. It can be done, but you're probably not getting into technical overtraining.
For sure.
Okay, so are you really getting to a spot where you're making progress worse? That would be hard to really do. Are you getting into a position though where the diminishing returns no longer weigh the benefits? Kind of a Pareto, 80-20 sort of rule, right? Return on investment, that kind of just depends on the person, right? It depends on how lean you are. If you're getting very, very lean, it's probably just going to take a lot of work to get those next few percentage points. And you're going to get that from your caloric intake, your nutrition, rather than energy expenditure. So I would say, I doubt many people are outworking themselves. What can happen though, and we have seen this in our rapid coaching program a ton, is people, their allostatic load. So their total stress load gets too high. It's not necessarily that they're working too much, but that could be a big contributor to that. What I mean by this is a combination of psychological stressors. Maybe they've got some sort of parasite or bacterial overgrowth. They've got some micronutrient deficiency. They've got some hormonal imbalance. They've got something else going on that's adding a ton of stress to the stress system. And these are non-specific or what we call hidden stressors. Okay, so this is all going on in their body. They don't know this. And then they start working out, they start training, which is a visible stressor. So they know that stress, they see it, they feel it, they're putting it on. And then all of a sudden they just feel like they're tanking. they feel like they're tanking and things are getting worse and they are stalling progress. Maybe insulin and testosterone and cortisol are becoming dysregulated. And you're like, man, it's not because you're actually working too hard. It's because you have too much of your stress bucket full of these non-specific hidden stressors. And now you do a little bit of this stuff and you're overflowing.
Yeah.
The system is now fighting back, pushing back. This has happened a lot with people who we work with, because we do a lot with athletes, but we do a lot with executives and parents and people running family, like these people who have higher stress jobs. If you have a really high basal stress load, sympathetic drive, and you're coupling that with a lot of high intensity training, this can get you to Fry City pretty fast. So that is a case where it's not like the workload per se, but it's the combination of the fact that you're going from really hard decision, stressful environment, maybe you're an ER nurse or a doctor or a police officer, like it's not even necessarily like just business people, right? It's people that are like, yo, we make really important decisions a lot and snap and fast and high pressure situations in those jobs. And then you get home and you go right to the gym and you do max intensity intervals every day, or that's all your training or something like that. And we start to look at things like respiratory rate, and we start to look at other physiological signs, and they are torched.
Yeah. Not to mention they're in a caloric deficit,
And they're in a caloric deficit, and they're not feeding into those systems. There's no down regulation practice. There's no other thing that they have that's giving their body a chance to fight back. And those people will survive for 6 weeks or 6 months, but many of them will eventually then just slam into a wall. And this is plateaus. This is negative, right? This is when, like, oh my God, things are getting, performance starts to dip, right? Sleep issues, psychological issues, but definitely plateaus. Like, will almost 100% be a plateau. Like, I can't get any leaner. I can't get any stronger. I can't grow any more muscle. Like, what is happening? I got to train more. And we look at the system and you're like, oh, no, we just got to get you to chill a little bit. Like, we have to bring that allostatic load down. You're just pegged out at this point. And so we will see those people when we back off intensity. And I don't necessarily mean just exercise. I mean total life intensity, one way or the other. Mm-hmm. Then we start to see massive jumps in progress. And it happens really quickly.
I mean, I've noticed that even with myself. If my training volume is very high, at the same time, emotional stress is high, business is high, all that, I'll notice it, but I've kind of adjusted to that. And then all of a sudden, if I drop volume, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm a new human, right? It's pretty amazing. Like, just, come to see, like, I've established this baseline at a fairly high volume, fairly high, like, allostatic load, and then all of a sudden take one of those things out of the equation. And it's like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to feel like, right? Yep. And it's really hard for a lot of people, especially probably executives and people like that, where they're just wired that way. It's really hard for them to say, okay, well, I have to throttle it down, right? So is that usually the recipe there? I mean, you can't just tell them to, like...
Actually, I appreciate you asking the question, because not necessarily.
Yeah.
What I want to be really clear about is, this is not just like, okay, let's stop working out. We're just going to do breath work and yoga.
Yeah.
Like, definitely not at all.
Good.
It's just going, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this maximal interval session every single day. Okay, can we keep it to 4 days a week? And then can we do something restorative? Maybe we don't need to change the exercise at all, but we can enter in a 10-minute down regulation practice post-workout. It can be something like that. It can be something like, you know what? We need 3 10-minute walks a day with no earplugs. Yeah. No podcasts, no business calls, nothing like that. It can be 1 10-minute walk a day. So there's lots of ways we can go about it. It doesn't have to just generally be like, we got to pull things back. And by pull back, we don't have to go all the way back. If it is a respiratory issue and we can change a breath rate and we can work on something like that, there's lots of things we can do. It can be a stimulant. Bring down stimulant intake. Yeah. Okay, fine. Stuff like that. Not that we're against stimulants, but in that combination, in that scenario, we're over the realm there. Yeah. You would not want to pull these people back to no exercise. That would be really bad as well, because they clearly have energy that needs to get burned.
Yeah.
Then they're going to ruminate. They're going to be in problems there. Physiologically, they're not going to be happy as well. Sleep's probably going to go in a bad direction. So it is just figuring, okay, like how can we just balance this thing, yin yang, right? It's not necessarily just like come back off of, but it's going, okay, if you're going to press hard on action, I need you to press hard on relaxation too.
Yeah.
So give me hard there, right? So we may change out something like, great, that hour you spend from 7 to 8 p.m. on wrapping up your emails, we're going to spend that hour on learning a language, playing guitar. We're going to spend that on something else. It's not Zen per se. They're working. They're getting after. They're thinking.
Yeah.
But it's a thing that actually gives them like...
It fills their bucket a little bit.
Brings something back down, right? So it doesn't have to just always be this like... And sometimes it can though. Like sometimes it is like, yo, we're going to take some CBD bubble baths. Like, chill.
Yeah.
So like all those options are possible.
And lastly, and this connects with what we were just talking about, because I'm very curious your take on this, and we'll kind of end with this one. For guys specifically, when you're looking at, well, I guess I could apply for women too, but with testosterone, right? A lot of guys' first instinct when their testosterone levels are low is, okay, well, let's go ahead and let's just exogenously bump this up, right? And that is something that, as I'm in my mid-30s, I would absolutely, based on numbers, be a candidate for TRT. I don't have a desire to go there because I feel like I'm not really symptomatic. I know I'm symptomatic when I feel low testosterone symptomatic when my calories are low, but I'm wise enough to know that that's what's doing it, right? So, but even when my calories are increased, libido's fine, everything's good to go, testosterone is still moderately low. And I think I've heard you talk about this before, where a little bit too much stock is placed on the testosterone level. Yeah. And I think this is a good message for guys to realize that this is like one piece, and I don't want to take the words out of your mouth because I have my opinions on it. I want to let you talk about it. But I mean, it's a great example, right? It's like, okay, you've got this allostatic load, and yes, like your testosterone level is here, but also, A, maybe that allostatic load is contributing to that, but B, maybe that number doesn't matter nearly as much as you think too.
Yeah. We've coached hundreds of people, thousands of people, no question. And I'm not an MD, so I've never once given somebody TRT or any medication. Right? That's not what we do. I'm not against it at all. And there have been plenty of people that we have coached who come into the program already on it, but I'll say we've had a lot of people come into our program because they went to a really crappy TRT clinic, got online, did telehealth, something like that, felt great for 6 weeks. And then the world collapses. Some time domain, right? It's different for everyone, but it can happen. I'm not against it at all. I think it's phenomenal as a resource for many people. Not like no judgment, don't care. There are some reasons when that is the great solution. But for us, what we yet to really see it for the people we worked with as being like this first place we have to go to. There are a lot of ways to enhance your testosterone, a lot, if it is really a problem. And we have just seen this so routinely that you've not really solved the problem here, right? So the question should be, why is it low to begin with? And you can see, and people love to talk about this fact that our testosterone in men is getting so much lower than it used to be. I'm like, okay, great, why? Well, your physiology will tell us. There's something in there that is causing that testosterone to be low. So I would personally, again, philosophically, I'm more interested in just going in and finding that, solving that problem, and then stepping back and just watching your testosterone take off. And we have seen this, I can't even tell you how many times people go up with not a single drug or medication of any kind. And it could be a plethora of different solutions. Sometimes it's super, super easy. Sometimes it's more complicated. But really, I just don't know if we've ever had an example of not having success there. Yeah. Like it's really like, I know I'm sounding pretty arrogant to say this, but our success rate is very high in getting that up. Part of the reason we've developed this is because for many years I only worked with elite athletes, and we don't have TRT as an option. Yeah. Right? We can't do that in the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball and golf and live. We can't do those things there. So we've had to figure out ways to get these things up without it. And then when we opened the program up to non-athletes, which is like, well, we're just going to provide you the same service we provided all these other people. And if they want to do it, then great, you work with your doctor, that's awesome, like all good. But if you want to try to get this thing up without that, then like we go after it and we're pretty good.
So the number itself, I mean, does androgen receptor density have anything to do with it? Because I know a lot of people, I mean, candidly, myself included, I'm in the 300s. My testosterone level is not that high, but I have sex a lot.
Yep.
I build muscle just fine.
Yep.
I'm definitely not lethargic. Yep. My sleep has some issues, but that comes from life and having young kids and probably other crap. But I mean, out of those 4 lifestyle pieces, like I'm checking the box on 3 and being in pretty darn good shape, right? Yep. And my testosterone levels by most standards would be pretty low. Can you explain how that works in terms of like, not even free and total, but also just what can actually dock and what can actually like androgen receptor density, where I just want to have someone that knows how to explain that just the number doesn't matter.
Yeah. So testosterone is simply a thing that's in your system. In this case, it's going to be kicking around in your blood. And what you're referring to with the androgen receptors is, in order for that testosterone to do anything on a cell, it has to bind to that cell. And so it's not just about how much testosterone is floating around the system, it's about how many can actually bind to the cells. In this case, that's what the androgen receptor is. So it's the part on the actual cell that allows testosterone to bind. That's what activates all the benefits of the testosterone. That's not something you can measure in blood. You have to have a biopsy or whatever tissue, but those receptors are everywhere. They're not just in skeletal muscle. So you can't go around biopsying every part of your body and figuring that out. So you don't know that number. What you're kind of getting at here is it possible, and the answer is yes, for someone to have like a lower total testosterone, but actually not have any anabolic issues? Yeah. And one of the reasons would be potentially their androgen receptors are super sensitive or super abundant. Either and or a combination of those things. The other thing you got to remember too is, like we've said earlier, physiology doesn't do just one thing. You have backup systems. In other ways, testosterone is not the only anabolic agent you have. Women have like something like the post-exercise testosterone release in women is like 45 times lower than in men, despite the fact that they grow muscle at the same average rate that men do. Which is to say, okay, what? Yeah, women will add muscle mass at the same relative rate that men do if training and nutrition and sleep and all that is equated for. Now they're smaller, so the total amount of muscle mass is lower that they add, but the relative amount that they increase, the percentage increase, is basically identical. And there's 20 years of data on that. Despite the fact that they have, again, 45 times less post-exercise testosterone release. How's that possible? Well, potentially receptor issue. Potentially estradiol or some other mechanism for women plays an anabolic role. The reality of it is, like, we know a lot about testosterone, but we still are understanding mechanisms of muscle growth and activity, and physiology always has backups. It always has other ways it can go about it. We haven't even gotten into like negative regulators of growth like myostatin. So there's other ways to get there. It's not just the like pump the anabolic side. It is maybe we're changing the catabolic side. Maybe we're opening up different mechanisms because that sort was low in you, right? So you may naturally be fairly low, but I'm not even going to call it asymptomatic because there's nothing to be symptomatic for. It is fine. Your body and your genetic your genome and your genotype in those areas has optimized for other things. And I know we're getting a little bit long here, but like a really easy example of this, you can take the myostatin people, right? You can take my favorite example is actually EPO. Mm-hmm. So erythropoietin, that's just the thing that makes red blood cells in your body. This is a classic guy in like the 1960s and 70s, won a bunch of Olympic championships in skiing, right? And everyone's like, oh, this guy's doping, he's doping. Actually was doping with amphetamines, but it was legal at the time. But everyone's like, he's on EPO, right? Because his hematocrit was like 60%. His hemoglobin was like 23 or 24 milligrams. It's just off the charts, right? These numbers are like totally absurd. But he kept winning races. Well, it wasn't until like 1990 they actually genotyped his EPO, and he had this super rare mutation that allowed those receptors to be hypersensitive to EPO. So his EPO concentrations were always the same, it didn't matter, but the receptors were ultra sensitive to there. So any amount of training he got had this massive receptor response, which allowed his hematocrit and hemoglobin to just be off the charts. And they know that because they actually gene tested his family and they had the same variant. And they were also a bunch of dope, like, wrong word choice there, a bunch of really effective, really good endurance athletes. So yeah, like there are these things happen. You see the same thing with myostatin. There are these super, super rare mutations. I think only one human has actually ever been documented with true myostatin.
Belgian blue cows?
Well, yeah, tons of animals, right?
Yep.
Right, bull weevils, kangaroos. The original stuff that came out on the Schwarzenegger mice, like this is what some of this stuff came from, right? So that is absolutely possible, and those are extreme rare mutations, right, that happen really. But even if you don't have the true rare mutations, you just have a select phenotype. It's going to play, or a genotype rather, you're going to play some role there. But even something like skeletal muscle, like you have something like over 1,000 different gene types that are known to be associated that play a role in muscle. Yeah. So it's not one or two or three, it's thousands of them, right? Which is to say, like, it's also quite silly to make any real decisions based on a few genetic markers if thousands of them go into any phenotypical expression. Like there's something like they're projecting something in the neighborhood of 25,000 total genes actually contribute to how tall you are. So like you took a test, measured 3 things, and now you're going to change your B vitamin status? Yeah. Like, get out of here. Yeah. It's absurd. So anyways, I got off track there, but yeah, there's lots of ways to get there. So I would tell you personally, I don't really care what that number is. I'm more cared about you as a human. Yeah. Seems to be firing on all cylinders there. I would strongly encourage you to generate a passport of that number. Yeah. You probably do. Take it every 6 months. watch that thing. That way, if something does happen, you know it. The last point I'll say on this is, I think this is exactly why people should get blood work done early in life, regardless if they're making an intervention. Because you know that you've been at 300 or 350 or whatever you said for the last 10 years, for example, only because you've been taking it for 10 years. Yeah. If you had never taken it before, and you're 35 years old, and the first time you take it, you're like, oh, I'm 300.
Yeah.
You might go like, oh my God, my testosterone's getting crashed. Dude, maybe it hasn't crashed. Maybe this is the highest it's ever been. Yep. But you don't know that, right? So getting those numbers, even if you take no action whatsoever, and just creating your own little database and passport, so if you do get a head injury, or you do have this crash of libido, a doctor can look at that and go, yeah, your testosterone is 300, but actually your libido is not coming from that because it's been about 300 or so the last 6 or 7 years. I think we're fine. So when did the symptoms start? A year ago. Well, your testosterone was the same the previous 5 years before that. That's not causing it. It's something else.
Yeah.
Without that, though, you're getting nothing. You're getting slammed on TRT, and that's a Pandora's box you don't get to go back on. Once you make that choice, typically once, you're going to be dealing with those things the rest of your life. And for a 30, 40-year-old, making unlimited information, well, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I try to tell people the same thing. Like, hey, if you're going to make this decision, you better be well sure that this decision you want to make. I'm
super for it.
Yeah.
If you have a real good quality MD paying attention,
yeah.
It can be done very well. It can change people's lives.
Yeah.
Just be careful if you're doing this thing basically by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Which, unfortunately, that's the way a lot of it is these days.
Totally.
All right, my man. Where can everyone find you? Where can everyone also do some of the stuff you're talking about, some of the testing with you guys and all that? Oh,
yeah, sure. The Instagram and Twitter are the places I spend most time for science communication. And all of our coaching programs and our companies, the Bloodwork company is called Vitality Blueprint, and our sleep company, Absolute Rest, all that can be found on my website, andygalpin.com.
Perfect. Thanks, my man.